The journey begins in 2016. I and my classmates set out for our SSC exams, of course, being in the final year of our secondary school training in SS3 class. We set out for our UTME, that's Unified Tertiary Matriculation Exams, popularly known as JAMB in this part of the world, our WAEC, regulated by the West African Examination Council, as well as our NECO, the National Examination Council. I opted for medicine and surgery at the Ahmadu Bello University Zaria as my first choice in my UTME application. My decision to opt for medicine and surgery, and specifically at the Ahmadu Bello University Zaria, stems from a few factors. Some of these factors include, number one, my background. My father and my eldest brother happen to be alumni of the institution. Number two, I also had a personal penchant for the institution's high standard of learning, its rich history, as well as its culture. I also drew from my passion for science subjects in general. I was specifically quite passionate about biology as a subject, and I remember quite vividly on the fateful day my biology teacher, quite a remarkable biology teacher, taught the topic homeostasis. It was quite fascinating to study about the homeostatic organs, from the kidneys to the liver, the skin, the lungs, the endocrine glands, seeing how they all worked intricately to ensure balance and sustainability in the internal environment of the living organism. It was quite enjoyable, coupled with the fact that I come from a background that holds our faith quite highly. Of course, I prayed about it and I felt led to apply for medicine and surgery and at the Ahmadu Bello University Zaria. Stemming from the fact that I was quite young at the time, and I was also quite bankrupt of the requisite knowledge as far as admission into a competitive program like medicine and surgery was. I was naive, to say the least, and I really did not know how hard I had to work to get admission to such a competitive program of choice like medicine and surgery. As a result of this, my preparation was quite scanty, and I focused my preparation majorly on WAEC and NECO exams respectively. I sat for the exam, UTME of course. The result was finally released, and due to my lack of effective preparation, I scored a very mediocre, very average score. Was quite above the cutoff mark, of course, never reaching a UTME where I scored below the cutoff mark. But then, considering that I was opting for a course as highly sought after as medicine and surgery, my score was quite insufficient, of course. And I proceeded to, prepare for my WAEC and NECO. I prepared quite voraciously for those exams in conjunction with my very dynamic classmates back then. We prepared really hard for the two exams under the tutelage, mentorship, and guidance of my then exam officer, quite caring, quite passionate, and quite an intelligent man as well. He was more like a father to us back in the day. He took very good care of us, ensuring that our preparation and that in general we left no I's undotted and no T's uncrossed. Under his tutelage, as well as our cooperation and teamwork, we turned out very outstanding WAEC and NECO results that year. Weeks continued to roll by. Weeks soon turned into months, and it was finally time for the Ahmadu Bello University Zaria to, of course, release their admission lists. The first list came out, of course, preceded by the second list and the supplementary list. Considering how quite average my UTME score was, and also comparing it with the competitive program of choice which I had gone for, which of course happens to be medicine and surgery, I unfortunately missed out on admission for that entire calendar year. 2017 came, and of course I registered another UTME. My preparation intensified because I could see much clearer at the time. I prepared for the exam, sat the exam, and my score was soon released. It was quite higher than my previous score. On the advice of my parents, alongside a couple other well-wishers, I made the decision to apply for biochemistry in the short term, while I made future preparations for my first choice course, which was of course medicine and surgery. My score was sufficient to guarantee me a spot on the merit list of the applied institution, so I gained admission to study biochemistry. As time went by, I saw the futility in going for biochemistry. Number one, I knew biochemistry wasn't quite lucrative as far as Nigeria's labor market was concerned, and that wasn't my passion. So I made the decision to turn the admission offer down. Didn't sit quite nicely with my parents and a couple other well wishers. Of course, everyone wanted the best for me, and they didn't want me to fall behind time. It was a rough decision, but I knew I was carving a path for myself in destiny. So I doubled down on my decision. I was all set for another UTME in the year 2018. 2018 came, registered, sat for the UTME, and unfortunately the results came out. My score plummeted, which means it was quite lower than what I scored in 2017, sadly. I applied for MBBS at the Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria. The end of the year approached, sometime around October. I went for those UME exams, sat for the exam, and my aggregate score, the results came out and my aggregate score also was released, and it was quite not too phenomenal, but it was quite okay. Admission list was soon released, and unfortunately from the first list to the supplementary list, I wasn't offered any course whatsoever by the Ahmadu Bello University in my 2018 application. 2019 came and I registered another UTME exam. I guess you could say at the time I was more or less becoming a customer at the CBT centers. At the time as well, I was getting more clarity. I began understanding the intricacies of admission into the MBBS program. I now was getting to learn that it goes beyond you just being the top of your class. Getting admission to study MBBS requires a lot of knowledge. It requires a lot of discipline, consistent studying, and most importantly, it requires mentorship and guidance. I knew this, and it influenced my preparation for the 2019 UTME. I read really intensely for the exams, but my application wasn't to the Ahmadu Bello University Zaria, but to another institution in the Northeast, of course. I sat for the exams and my result was finally released. My score happened to be much higher than, at the time, that was the highest I had ever scored in UTME up until that point. And when I saw the score, I was convinced that that was my time. Considering I'm from the North, I knew I stood a very decent chance at admission for that calendar year. The institution I applied to admits students in phases. The first phase, you get invited for what is called a physical screening exercise. And basically during that exercise, what they do is they vet your credentials. They go through, your credentials, and they see if they are actually genuine. And if they find no discrepancies, they proceed to offer you your provisional admission letter, and then you proceed with registration. I was looking forward to receiving the physical screening invitation, and on one fateful afternoon while I was chilling in my room, I got a message that the school had begun inviting candidates for the physical screening exercise. With much excitement, I logged into my portal and I saw very, very exciting news. I had been invited for the physical screening exercise. I exclaimed for joy. It was quite a phenomenal experience for me. Quite exciting and at the same time very, very dramatic. I immediately dashed to the backyard of my house, jumped, hitting the ceiling for joy, and immediately dashed to the room where my mother and elder brother were having a conversation. I broke in, I was like, I've gotten admission, and my mom was like, "Una brother, don't become doctor." Everyone was literally excited, and I immediately made my way back to my room. But on my way to my room, something unexpected ensued. I paid a closer look to the notification I was sent, and I found some very troubling news. You won't see this one coming. I saw that I wasn't invited for physical screening for medicine and surgery, but for Bachelor of Technology Biochemistry. Now, this is sad, I guess we can put it that way, because if you recall clearly, in the year 2017, I was offered biochemistry, which I turned down, and now I'm being offered biochemistry again. It was quite sad, quite crazy. And the hardest part was having to go back to my parents who were already celebrating my admission to inform them that, look, this thing isn't medicine and surgery, but Bachelor of Technology Biochemistry. It was quite difficult for me, but I had to muster the confidence and the courage to reach out to them informing them, and of course everyone was sad, and time continued to run its course. Of course, I couldn't turn down the biochemistry offer. I still had my eyes on medicine and surgery, of course, but I had to, get something in the interim while I hopefully made future attempts at my desired program of choice, which of course is medicine and surgery. I made plans and traveled for the physical screening exercise at the institution. I remember my conversation with the desk officer, of course, the man in charge of screening students. I neatly arranged my credentials in an envelope, handed it over to him, and the moment he saw my score and my state of origin, he exclaimed. He was like, "Excuse me, your people are not here. Your fellow medical aspirants are at the other campus." The institution happened to have two campuses. The one I was at was for the general science and engineering aspirants, and the other campus happens to be where the medicine and surgery aspirants are based. He had presumed that I needed directions, hence his statement. I immediately explained to him my predicament. He listened and he got quite emotional. He just encouraged me, told me not to give up, and said there was very little he could do. I had to accept the course I was being offered. I accepted it and proceeded to collect my provisional admission letter, and I returned back to my base. Now the year continued to roll by, and along the line I received a text message from the institution's ICT unit asking candidates who had their first choice courses changed to log into their JAMB transfer approval menu to accept transfers to other programs of choice. I kept tabs on my JAMB profile, and on one fateful day during the crossover service of my church, while I was on the keyboard of all times, I logged into my UTME portal and saw a very shocking news. It read, "Your institution of choice wishes to transfer you from your first choice program of choice to animal production." Now this was really, it was quite puzzling at the time. You recall that I had applied for MBBS, medicine and surgery, initially, right? And during the physical screening exercise, the school had changed my course to Bachelor of Technology Biochemistry. And now on the transfer approval menu, on the instruction of the same institution, the same application, the same calendar year, I'm being recommended for a transfer to animal production. It was really, really confusing. Without telling anyone, I excused myself from the church because the news was shocking. So I didn't want to cause any chaos. I went outside, thought about it, and declined the offer. Of course, if you're an aspirant, you should know how JAMB's portal works. Every candidate has the option to either accept an admission or reject it. At the time, I knew absolutely nothing about the course animal production. It wasn't something I was passionate about at all. And of course, I wasn't going to study animal production. I had made the compromise to, accept biochemistry in the short term, while I possibly made future attempts at my first choice course, medicine and surgery. So I rejected the offer, and without informing any of my family members. Subsequently, though I informed them that, okay, this is the development, and it happened that they also shared the same sentiment with me. No one had plans for me to study animal production, so I turned it down. And for me, what that meant was that I had lost out on another admission for another calendar year. So I immediately began to make plans for a subsequent UTME application. All right, sometime between late December and early January, between the year 2019 and 2020, for some strange reason, I kept tabs of my application for the same calendar year, and had noticed rather strangely that on my initial application for medicine and surgery had changed from not admitted to admission in progress. Of course, it's important you all know that admission via JAMB happens in 3 stages. From not admitted, you get recommended by your applied institution to JAMB, and then it changes to admission in progress, and subsequently to congratulations, you've been offered admission, of course. Now, I kept tabs of the situation, and on one fateful morning in early January, around 1 a.m., I noticed to my utter shock that the application had changed from admission in progress to congratulations, you have been offered admission to study medicine and surgery. I wasted no time in accepting the offer, but I was confused. My story was all over the place, was quite puzzling. So I knew I had loads of questions and I needed answers, and the only place I could get sufficient answers for all of my questions was at the Senate building of my applied institution. Unfortunately for me, COVID-19 struck and the entire nation was thrown into a nationwide lockdown. Now, at that point, I had accumulated a lot of anxiety stemming from the fact that I had spent quite a couple of years outside the four walls of an academic institution, and coupled with the fact that a couple of my classmates from back in the day had begun making sufficient progress on their own academic journeys. It began to feel like I needed to, get a grip of my own story. So I was quite anxious. I needed to know the next steps I had to take and what my fate was. Luckily for me, that was the same year that JAMB, of course, the Joint Admissions and Matriculation Boards, launched their ticketing platform. The ticketing platform is sort of like an online channel that helped, aspirants that had controversial issues or complaints to interface and interact with online JAMB customer service agents and have their complaints sorted. This was established in line with the COVID-19, regulations and all of that. So it afforded me the opportunity to get some answers before the lockdown got lifted. I opted for the ticketing option, so I began attempting to reach out to customer service agents. I initially struggled to explain my predicaments to them. Of course, you would agree that my story was quite the story. It was difficult to explain what was going on to them, but fortunately for me, I connected to one agent that was able to understand what I was saying, and they explained to me that JAMB's role is to serve as a mediator, or sort of like a middleman between the institution and then the aspirant, meaning they only offer admissions on the recommendation of the applied institutions. What he was saying was that my offer for medicine and surgery had to have emanated or originated from the same institution themselves. And in his exact words, your admission for medicine and surgery at institution A remains legitimate. And that was really exciting to note. And of course, it was the exact confidence I needed to proceed to the institution as soon as the lockdown got lifted. At long last, the COVID-19 lockdown was lifted. My father and I concluded plans and made our way for the states where the institution was based, so we could visit, the registrar or the admission officer and clarify matters once and for all. We got to the town, and after a couple hit and miss attempts, found ourselves at the registrar's secretary's desk. I struggled to explain my predicament to him as well, because as you can tell, my story was quite complicated, right? Along the line though, the registrar secretary began to get a hang of what was going on. I presented my admission letter for medicine and surgery read from JAMB with the JAMB registrar's signature and everything on it, with the course medicine and surgery. And in hindsight, I can imagine that at that point, the registrar secretary began to notice, he began to smell a rat, and it became rather clear to him that my admission was possibly being denied illegally. And so he became immediately defensive and tried to make a case for his institution. Of course, he tried to talk me out of, going further with my complaints. He said a couple things to me, one of them being that, the institution gives priority to indigenes of the state where they are based when it comes to admission into competitive programs like medicine and surgery, and they only offered admission to one candidate each from every catchment state. And being from the north, my state happens to be one of those catchment states. So what he was saying was that I most probably had been, outscored or outperformed by someone else from my state. I would have, accepted his explanation, but before we embarked on that journey, I had accessed the Joint Admissions and Matriculations Board's website, and I had seen the matriculation list. Back then, JAMB often released what we call the matriculation list, which is a comprehensive admission list showing all the candidates that have successfully gained admission via JAMB portal, their states of origin, their courses, and all of that. So I saw on their site that I was the only candidate who was offered medicine and surgery from my state. So I wasn't really impressed by his argument. I tried to press further to make a case for myself. And I remember a really emotional, conversation I had with a lady, a middle-aged woman who was sitting right behind us, eavesdropping on our conversation at the lobby, of course. She was like, "My dear son, have you considered the element of destiny? How about you just let this thing be? Perhaps you are not destined, in quotes, to study medicine and surgery." And as she said that, it got really emotional for me. And on the registrar secretary's path, he was defending his institution at all costs. So he became rather, aggressive, began yelling and screaming. And I, just spoke to my father and advised that we left that place with immediate effect. So we made our way out of the campus and boarded a tricycle. Of course, it was quite a long distance. And in that lonely tricycle ride that day, after a very, very long time, for the first time, I cried. We eventually returned to the main town, and as we arrived, we had two options at hand. Number one, it's either we chose to spend the night there, then the following morning we make our way back to our base. Option two, we could, just decide to travel. Since we're quite sad, depressed, and annoyed, we could just decide to, just make our way back to our base right on the spot. We decided to go with option two because at the time it was more or less like the town was giving us some bad vibes. So we quickly proceeded to the motor park. It was around 2 p.m. We struggled to get passengers to fill our vehicle. At long last, though, we got a couple passengers, and it was now time for us to embark on the journey back to base. We shuttled along, and night soon caught up with us. As we shuttled along the lonely, somewhat deserted highway, the dead silence of the night was interrupted by sporadic gunshots. I mean, it was intense. I froze because that was the very first time in my life I was caught up in the midst of such a traumatic experience. My life flashed across on the spot. And at the time, all that I thought about was the news of terrorist attacks and banditry, kidnapping, and all of that. So I was now caught up at the center of one myself. It was like I was daydreaming or something. While I was still in shock, my dad quickly tapped me and was like, jump out and run for safety or something. I did just that. Opening the door and attempting to jump out of the vehicle, the buckle of my sandals, quite unfortunately, clamped onto a sharp metal under the seats right in front of me, causing me to fall fatally on the highway, the concrete highway, of course. I fell really fatally, but as I fell, I rose. As I fell, I rose. I fell and rose a couple times, roughly 3 times. At the time, my fright and flight response had been triggered already, adrenaline and all of that. So I wasn't really thinking about pain. I was just trying to scamper for safety at all costs. Eventually, after a couple minutes, I was in the middle of a thick forest in no man's land. I quickly looked across and I couldn't find my father anywhere. My heart skipped multiple beats. At the time, all I could hear was the noise and chatters of the terrorists who were harassing those who weren't strong and agile enough to, scamper for safety into the forest like us. And of course, my father happened to be one of those people. After a couple minutes, I heard the door to the vehicle slam shut, and then the driver just, zoomed off. What I thought at the time that was most probably the handiwork of kidnappers, and my father was definitely at the center of it. I prayed a very emotional prayer in the middle of that thick forest that day. I was like, dear God, if anyone was going to get hurt as a result of this, let it be me and not anyone else. I didn't want my dad to get hurt as a result of my ambitions and my dreams, and I wasn't ready to make my mom a widow at that time. As luck would have it, I tapped on my pockets and found my phone. I whipped out my phone and immediately contacted my siblings who were of course back home, informing them of the unfortunate events that had, taken place. Much to my relief, they informed me that my father had already contacted them a couple minutes prior and was safe with the police. That was a huge relief for me. After a couple minutes, I got a phone call from an unknown number. I picked the call, and I soon learned that that was, a policeman interacting with me. He was, of course, with my father, and they gave me a very scary instruction. They instructed that I, came out of the forest where I was to the highway and run north from where I was for the main town. That was a very scary one to attempt because I was terrified, of course, because what if these bandits were still hiding or lying in wait, waiting to swoop on those of us who felt we were smart or agile enough to outsmart them. So I had two options: is either I be brave or I risked spending the night in a thick forest in no man's land. I chose to be brave, took off my shirt, of course, took off my sandals and ran for the highway. When I got to the highway, I faced north of where I was and began running relentlessly for the town. After a couple minutes, I saw the signboard of a very popular church. I knew, of course, that was a landmark, so I could stand there and then give the police directions to come pick me up. As luck would have it, after a couple minutes, I noticed the headlamp of a Hilux vehicle approach me. And when they got closer, I found that it was, of course, the police together with my dad. They picked me up, lodged us at a hotel at the town, and we spent the night there. The following morning, we proceeded to the police station where we wrote our statements and returned back to base. On arrival at our base, we were greeted by a small crowd of religious leaders, neighbors who had gathered to commiserate with my mom and comfort her for the unfortunate scenario that had played out. In the midst of that really trying time of my life, a rare opportunity sprung up. Prior to that, when I noticed that my admission application for the previous calendar year wasn't quite making sense during the period where everything was all over the place, I made the smart move to make another UTME application. I sat for the exams. Of course, I applied for medicine and surgery at the Ahmadu Bello University Zaria. My UTME score was quite high. Of course, I kept the offer up my sleeve, and I got news after the trauma. I got news that the institution I had applied for in 2017 for biochemistry, they had gotten NUC's approval for the commencement of 5 medical programs: human anatomy, human physiology, medical laboratory science, physiotherapy, as well as medicine and surgery. So it was a rare opportunity for me to snap up. I immediately applied for change of institution from ABU Zaria to the said institution, and my score was sufficient to guarantee me a spot on the first list of the institution for medicine and surgery. It was quite a difficult experience for me, transiting from spending a couple years outside school back into the academic setting. It was quite intense considering the psychological, the emotional, and the physical scars I had from my previous application. It was quite tough, but with determination, consistent studying, and with purpose-driven, hard work and determination, I was eventually able to conclude my first year with a first-class CGPA. After I concluded my first year, on the holiday of that period, I began some in-depth research and studies about the medical program and accreditation and all of that. I began to make some findings, discovering that accreditation for medical programs and professional programs generally happened in phases, okay? And so the school needed, beyond the NUC's accreditation, to fully run, train, and graduate full-fledged medical doctors. So I learned that the Medical and Dental Council would have to vet and approve the institution before they would effectively run the program. Bearing that in mind, I made a subtle, move. I registered for another UTME. That's, of course, the 2021 UTME. I sat for the exam. My score came out, and I scored quite brilliantly. I kept it up my sleeve. It was now time for us to get into preclinicals. Of course, 200 level. It was quite an exciting time. I and my coursemate then were quite fascinated by the prospects of finally getting to study the stuff that made us passionate about medicine to start with. Some of us got the required textbooks from Kit Moore for human anatomy, Guyton for physiology, Vasudevan, Lippincott for biochemistry, Cunningham's practical manuals, our surgical gloves and dissecting kits. It was quite a joyful period for us. On the day we resumed at our institution, we resumed to meet a rude shock. Trust me, you won't see this one coming. We met an entirely empty and deserted College of Medicine building. Now, it would have made sense to us if the entire school was equally short. It would have probably been a strike or something like that. But we noticed that the entire school was in motion, in full session. Including the faculties, the new faculties that were established alongside ours. That's, of course, the Faculty of Law and the Faculty of Engineering. So it appeared to us that something fishy was definitely happening. The result of this controversy was that after a couple weeks and months, some of my classmates and myself, we knew that the program at the institution was more of a long-term project. It seemed like the institution commenced the medical program 5 years too early. Our time at the institution was quite daunting, but of course, I and my very dynamic, very brilliant, very disciplined classmates, we tried to make the best of the situation. Of course, for those of us who were Christians, we went as far as organizing prayer meetings and fasts to, pray and petition God to intervene on whatever was going wrong in our college, because most of us had been through a lot already, weren't ready to, repeat another cycle of trauma. So we tried to maintain a positive attitude, kept showing up for lectures, even if most days, due to the fact that the college lacked the requisite manpower to man all the medical programs, lectures didn't hold on most occasions. There are a couple periods and a couple standout moments that I would say I experienced from back then. I remember when we finished one of our usual prayer meetings, one of the two lecturers assigned to the college from the Faculty of Science back then that tried his best to, hang around us, motivating and encouraging us. He shared some really exciting news to us after our prayers. He was like, the institution has concluded plans to finally get us cadavers for gross anatomy practicals. We all exclaimed for joy and clapped our hands. It was the most exciting news we could hear at the time. It was more like we're celebrating the coming of the cadavers. Hilarious, right? But yeah, that's where we were at the time. I remember one occasion while I was commuting between the hostel and the college building, two ladies standing right behind me, they made some extremely belittling remarks. They were like fake medical students only to wear tie. Of course, I dressed in corporate with my tie, a white shirt, well-ironed trousers and my cover shoe. They were like, we just like feeling ourselves medical students, but no lecturers and all of that. The time was quite daunting actually. And it was almost like the moment someone finds out that you are one of the infamous pioneer medical students of the said institution at that time, they begin to express pity for you. It was more like they were mourning the loss of your medical career, because at the time it didn't seem like the institution had anything on ground to prove that they were serious about running a medical program. I remember a very interesting exchange I had with one of my relatives who I met. I was based at my state at the time, so he asked what I was studying. He knew the school I was studying at, but he asked me, okay, what are you studying? And I was like, medicine and surgery. His next question was, where is the teaching hospital? Do you guys have a teaching hospital? And these experiences I had back then that helped shape my perspective, educate me, and build me into who I am today. Over time, the news of our difficulties spread even beyond the four walls of the institution to the, akara seller and the yam seller, to the kiosk or shop owner. They all knew the moment they see you with a lab coat, it's more like they place their hands on their head and they like sympathize with you and all of that. This amongst several other experiences which I may not be able to include in this synopsis helped build and shape my perspectives, my character during this really challenging phase of my journey. Some of us who had sacrificed quite a lot to get there prayed earnestly that God would intervene so we could finally settle down and build a career of our own. Unfortunately, things continue to move from bad to worse. It was now time for the Ahmadu Bello University Zaria to conduct their post-UME exams for the 2021 session. But unfortunately, I didn't have the finances at the time to travel down to Zaria for the post-UME exams. And I was also caught up writing tests and exams at my school. So it wasn't possible, it wasn't feasible for me to travel down for the exams at the time. And mind you, I kept this application to myself, didn't want my parents to know about it because the journey had already been quite daunting. I wasn't going to stress them with another round of problems. I kept it to myself, continued to pray to God Almighty to make things work out where I was, because I worked very hard to, conclude my first year with a first class CGPA. I had a lot of prospects where I was. The idea of going to start afresh somewhere else was sickening, to say the least. So I continued to pray about it alongside my great classmates from back then. But unfortunately, things continued to move from bad to worse at the time. I decided on applying for a change of institution from ABU Zaria with my 2021 application to another institution that, of course, did not take post-UME exams, in order to avoid, just wasting that score and wasting that application. I switched to another institution and I let things be, continue to maintain a positive attitude where I was. As time went by, and on one fateful weekend, I went for a weekend rest at the residence of one of my relatives. And while I was chilling, I immediately remembered that I made an application for medicine and surgery at this institution. I just picked up my phone, logged into the portal, and to my utter amazement and surprise, I found that I had been offered admission to study medicine and surgery at this new institution. Now, I won't say I was excited for sure, because I genuinely wanted things to work out where I was, because time was running out for me. I was getting quite advanced in age. I kept the offer to myself and continued to maintain a positive mindset and attitude where I was, in hopes that things will eventually, improve. As time went by, I was pushed to the wall, and so I had to inform my parents of the new offer. And immediately they swung into action, began making research, making inquiries to figure out if the institution I was considering transferring to had better prospects compared to where I was. And their due findings revealed that though the institution wasn't exactly accredited fully by the Medical and Dental Council of Nigeria at the time, they had better prospects than where I was, had the requisite manpower and lecturers to run the college, also had effective practical facilities and all of that. So they threw their weight behind me the best they could. And thanks to a scholarship award I won, I was able to cater for my school fees needs, and it was now time for me to proceed from where I was to commence a new chapter. It was now time for me to commence a new chapter at my new institution. It was quite a lucrative opportunity for me. I was attracted to the school considering a few factors, one of them being that the school was actually sited at my state of residence. I was inspired by the prospects of schooling where I was based, because I dabbled in a lot back then. Was building Youth Destiny Nucleus, of course, YDN then, and I was also helping out in my mother's business. It was a nice opportunity for me to finally get a grip of my story and begin building a decent career for myself. As time went by, however, it became very, very obvious to me that my story wasn't quite over yet, considering a few factors like the accreditation status by the Medical and Dental Council of Nigeria, as well as acting on the advice and encouragement of a few other of my very good colleagues and friends from my time at the previous institution. These factors influenced my decision to make an additional application in 2023 UTME. And one thing that stands out for me in my story are the friends that I met during my time at the previous institution. I met destiny defining friends that helped shape my perspectives on life, my academic potential, and in ways I can't even construct into words in this short synopsis. Some of these guys are still very much part of my life till date. It was now time for me to consider traveling over to Zaria for the post-UME exams for my 2023 application. My 2023 UTME score happens to be quite high as well, very remarkable, very impressive score. It was now time for me to make the decision as to whether to proceed with the post-UME exam at the Ahmadu Bello University Zaria for my 2023 application, or just considering the fact that where I was at was quite okay. Things were moving fairly nicely. I was making great friends that were also very influential in shaping my perspective spiritually, academically, and in virtually every aspect of life. I was getting quite comfortable where I was, so it was time for me to make a decision. I was very reluctant to leave where I was because there were so many advantages to staying put. I struck a bargain with God. I made 3 very impossible requests. I made the requests as impossible as you can imagine. Number 1, I requested that whenever the post-UME dates will be released by the Ahmadu Bello University Zaria, the dates had to not coincide with my tests or my exams where I was at, because I wasn't trying to joke around with my admission. Okay. Number 2, I requested that the financial provisions for my journey over to Zaria to and fro had to be miraculously provided, because I wasn't trying to bug my parents with some unnecessary demands at the time. It had been quite a long, excruciating experience for myself and my family, so I wanted to leave them out of that. Number 3, I requested that God Almighty would somehow make the journey make sense to them, because it had been quite a daunting one. And so I made those 3 requests in hopes that one of them will not be granted, so I'll have an excuse to remain where I was. As God will have it, all 3 requests were granted. I was offered a scholarship award, and the venue for the award ceremony happened to be at Kaduna State, of course, where the post-UME exam for the Ahmadu Bello University Zaria was scheduled to take place. And the post-UME screening dates did not in any way coincide with my tests or exams where I was schooling at. So I had the leverage to go for the post-UME exam and come right back and fit in nicely. And of course, the scholarship award catered for request number 3, which of course was I needed the journey to make sense somehow to my relatives and my family members especially. Breaking the news of the scholarship to them was convincing enough for them to, throw their weight behind me and support my journey down to Zaria for the post-UME exam. I went for the exams, did my very best, and scored quite remarkably. My score was a great score, affording me a very reasonable aggregate that gave me a very good chance at securing my intended course, medicine and surgery, at the institution, of course, at the Ahmadu Bello University Zaria, which happens to be one of the most prestigious institutions in Nigeria, with a very well-structured, solid college of medicine that affords you the chance to get quality professional training. Put everything in prayers and allowed time to continue to run its course. As time went by, I got news that the Ahmadu Bello University Zaria had commenced shortlisting candidates for admission into the medicine and surgery program. I joined a WhatsApp aspirants platform where I connected with senior colleagues as well as fellow aspirants, so I was getting the required information I need about the whole admission process. I eventually learned that of a truth, some candidates had been offered admission for medicine and surgery. I proceeded to my own portal to check. Unfortunately, I saw not admitted. I was quite calm about everything because at the time I was safe where I was, and I wasn't in the driving seat of my own story anymore. I knew that God was more in control of my story. I was calm. I took 2 steps, however, that influenced my journey in no small ways. Number 1, I reached out to some senior colleagues seeking their counsel and advice and for their mentorship, of course. And I also prayed about the admission process, asking that God's will be done. eventually. During my mid-semester break, I returned home to refresh and restock, and it so happened that I was required to take a chemistry tutorial class for a small group of students during the holiday season, of course. I took them that class on that fateful day, and after the class, we usually convene to have a small brainstorming session where we ask questions and everyone attempts to answer the questions. While the brainstorming session was ongoing, and went aside just randomly check my portal. At that point, it was becoming more like a force of habit. From time to time, I kept checking my portal to see if anything had changed. So I checked the portal, and to my utter amazement, I had been offered admission to study medicine and surgery at the Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria. This story is a testament of the power of perseverance and consistency. It is proof of the power of purpose-driven determination. It is equally proof that no goal or no dream is too far-fetched that you cannot achieve, provided you pursue it legitimately in line with the fulfillment of your purpose. From my journey and my experience through life, I've been able to learn a couple really critical lessons about the concept of purpose. Number one, you don't find purpose from external achievements and accomplishments like a respectable degree, like money, wealth, power, or fame. Number two, purpose is multifaceted in the sense that your career choice is a significant aspect of the fulfillment of your purpose, but it isn't the only variable in the equation of the discovery and fulfillment of purpose. It's important we understand that the discovery and fulfillment of our purpose is a holistic game, one that requires that you factor in all the major variables of life. Number three, I've been able to learn that everyone and everything in the universe has a purpose, from the decomposers to the creeping things beneath the earth's crust, and to you listening and watching this video, you have a purpose. And if God didn't deem it fit to create you, you wouldn't have been alive and you would not have been existing on planet Earth. Understand that you are the solution to a specific problem on Earth. The earlier you begin to see yourself as a solution, the more fulfilled, the more accomplished you will be in your career, in your academics, and in every facet of your life. And to the young stars who have deemed it fit to stick with me on this synopsis right until this moment, I want to tell you that drawing from a very powerful quote that says that the two most important days in the life of a man are the days he is born and the day he discovers why, I would like to encourage you to prioritize the discovery and the fulfillment of your purpose. This is the most critical question you have to prioritize at this level of your life. Of course, I hope to share this amazing journey, this amazing experience of the discovery and fulfillment of your purpose through the activities of YDN, Youth Destiny Nucleus, of course, which operates on 4 basic value standpoints: purpose, character, young talents, and academic excellence. Keep looking forward to the movie Footprints of Purpose, and catch you guys at the top.
Just fight a little longer, my friend. It's all worth it in the end. But when you got nobody to turn to, just hold on and I'll find you. I'll find you. I'll find you. Just hold on and I'll find you.
I'm hanging on by a thread, and all I'm clinging to is prayers. And every breath is like a battle.